Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. Ukraine War news update, a geopolitical video concerning not just the war in Ukraine, but we're going to stretch it into stuff going on in the US with regard to the signal thing, and actually it is tangentially connected to Ukraine, because what we're learning from the signal messaging app scandal is that there's this real disdain for Europe within the top echelons of the US administration. And that actually has a very tangible impact on support for Ukraine, on how Europe forges its future. And then we get certain nations in Europe that are kind of being a bit problematic at the moment. I think even the $150 billion European or EU loan thing that Ursula von der Leyen is proposing or has proposed and is supposed to be getting kind of sorted out. We're now hearing that Italy, Spain and France are being very difficult about that with regard to kind of indebtedness. And there just really needs to be unity in Europe, because it's pretty obvious that the Americans have a great amount of, the Trump administration has a great amount of disdain for Europe at the moment. So when we're talking about the EU, countries are criticizing the war rhetoric, some countries, of the European diplomacy, head of European diplomacy, Kaja Kallas. So she's been quite bellicose, and I think, and probably many of you are thinking, yeah, rightfully so. She's thoroughly, properly recognizing the threat that Russia is posing to Europe and European security. But it turns out that Spain and Italy in particular are having issues with Kaja Kallas' statements, where they do not consider Moscow a source of primary threat to the EU, those countries. And of course, the further you are away, well, Spain is one of these countries that's quite far away on the western edge of Europe from Moscow, and so therefore doesn't really see Russia as being a threat in the same way they say that Poland does. Italy, not so much. Italy's just weird because there's more in the population, more empathy, more sympathy for Russia and Putin than in most other advanced European nations, economically advanced, the more prosperous of the European nations, the big hitters. Italy is a little bit of an anomaly. So yeah, you can explain Spain's position from its geographic distance from Russia, but Italy, there's something else going on there. And of course, two of the three parties in coalition are broadly pro-Russian. So Italy is a bit of a problem at the moment. Here, Max24 reporting from Politico, every citizen should stockpile enough food to be self-sufficient for at least 72 hours in case of a crisis. The European Commission is to warn, according to a draft of its preparedness union strategy seen by Politico. This is being touted as something to do with sort of war. According to the 17-page draft, the strategy should create a secure and resilient EU with the capabilities required to anticipate and manage threats and hazards independently of the nature or origin. Okay, so it may not be to do with war, just preparedness. Yeah, I mean, having 3 days worth of food, I mean, even if there's a big rush to shops, I mean, most people have probably got 3 days worth of food. Self-sufficient. What does that mean, though? It's not just going to be food. You could be talking about energy and lighting and so on and so forth. But interesting that there's this kind of almost fear-mongering, scaremongering, but I suppose it's a reflection that things are challenging these days and there are threats about. Thousands of Hungarians voted via text message in one of the most watched political TV shows in Hungary, answering the question: Would you give EU membership to Ukraine? This is something I don't know if this is what Orbán was talking about when he said, "I'm going to put this idea of Ukrainian accession to the EU to my population," but this is certainly one version of their opinion. 64% said yes, 36% said no. So that's actually an overwhelming support from that particular survey. Don't know what the biases are there, but overwhelming support for Ukrainian accession to the EU from Hungarians. Fascinating. Probably not what Orbán wanted to hear. And an anti-Orbán protest last night in Hungary escalated into a bridge blockade. So there's still wide-scale dissent going on in Hungary. And I think that's good news for democracy. Right, going across to Moldova, just to the right of Romania, more ways than one probably. Moldova detains the regional leader accused of taking money from Russia. Evgenia Gutul, so you might have seen her before, the head of Moldova's Gagauzia region, which is a region of Transnistria, which is particularly pro-Russian. Oh no, Gagauzia, that's not Transnistria. That's another region that wants to be a bit like Transnistria. She's been detained at, and I'm going to mispronounce this, it's not pronounced Chisinau, but it looks like it, Chisinau Airport, on the evening of March the 25th while attempting to leave the country. Moldovan Service of Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty has reported. So good to see they're still operational. Accused of taking money from Russia there. Absolutely, almost definitely something she has done. She's been seen with Putin previously and whatnot. Okay, Shashank Joshi refers to an article in The Economist, which I have highlighted, but I don't know if it still is. Actually, quite a lot of this is highlighted. So I am going to read through it. I think it's important. So how Europe can hurt Russia's economy. I have long said that one of the biggest threats to Ukraine really prevailing is if the US relieves the sanctions on Russia, because I think the US Treasury is doing an incredibly, or has done an incredibly vital thing in order to hamstring Russia financially, economically, and thus hurt their ability to prosecute the war. There are some, Paul Warburg did a video on this the other day saying, actually, the American sanctions aren't as important as you might think, and Europe holds the key. And there are others who would agree. I personally think it's the US do huge things, and what Paul Warburg in his video didn't really talk about was the secondary sanctions on places like China and India, and how that affects them taking on Russian crude oil and refining it, so on and so forth. So that there is an awful lot of power that the US does hold. Although there are payment systems, SWIFT payment system in Europe, and all of these ways that Europe can really affect Russia's outcome there in a way that maybe the US can't. So it's not just that the US holds a key. That here, the article, How Europe Can Hurt Russia's Economy, states near the beginning, there are more Western sanctions on Russia than the next 6 targets combined, see Chart 1. America alone has imposed nearly 6,500 penalties since February 2022, when Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine began. Europe has even more in place, although that is when you add the EU to these other nations in Europe. And I wonder whether some of those sanctions will be replications of what the EU has done as well. I don't know. But anyway, the article here says that actually, Europe has done even more than the US. Many, which are largely symbolic, punish people close to Putin by freezing their assets in the West. Others target Russian industries and institutions such as energy, armaments and finance by blocking their access to technology, Western markets and dollar payments. These are the ones the Kremlin wants undone. Although America may be keen to loosen up, in Europe such talk remains taboo. If America lifts sanctions, it is possible Europe will decide to keep its own in place. Some geopolitical pundits assume that would not matter much. Access to America's tech, currency and payment networks, they say, is what Russia really wants. But our analysis suggests this is wrong. Without Europe on side, Russia's trade, access to payment systems and foreign investment would all remain severely limited. Take trade first. Ending American sanctions could revive goods trade between the two countries, which shrank by 90% from 2021 to 2024. Even before the invasion, however, such trade was worth only a relatively meager $35 billion. Any rebound would be equally modest. By contrast, Russia's pre-war trade with the EU was worth 258 billion euros, which is $305 billion. If Europe stayed the course, that would not come back. And it goes on to give more discussion about the economy there and various different sanctions. A second area where Russia hopes to see progress is international payments. The exclusion of its banks from MasterCard and Visa, the big credit card networks, SWIFT, a messaging system, and the correspondent network that clears dollar transactions in America has caused friction in its dealings abroad. Such measures have, for instance, prevented Russian firms from repatriating hard currency from China and India, the main buyers of its oil, weakening the ruble. They've also they also block Russia's access to $274 billion of assets owned by its central bank and stored in the West. If American sanctions ended, such problems would ease but not vanish. Most of the Russian central bank's assets are in Europe and would presumably stay frozen. Most Russian banks would still be cut off from SWIFT, which is based in Belgium. They may also struggle to get dollars if American banks are hesitant to clear payments owing to European sanctions. 3 years of war have turned Russia into a financial black box. Its membership of the Financial Action Task Force, the world's dirty money watchdog, has been suspended. It would also be subject to divergent regulatory regimes across the West, which may be enough to dissuade banks from taking on Russian clients. And then it goes on to talk about foreign investment, which has already shrunk, and that would be hard to come by going forward without Europe on side. So going it alone, it says at the end, relief from American sanctions looks unlikely to transform Russia's economy. Europe might even try to sabotage the Détente, though that would risk Mr. Trump's wrath. Its regulators could tell foreign banks that should any of the Russian-linked transfers be found to touch their European operations, they will be held criminally liable. Many non-European transactions move through Dublin, Frankfurt or London at some point in their execution. Europe could decide to scrap the oil price cap instead, barring its shipping firms and financiers from being involved with Russian sales. Now, as an aside, this is exactly what Russia have asked for, which is maritime insurance to be lifted. Issues with that, sanctions on that, and of course that will be dependent on the UK towing the party line. But of course the UK seems to be rather beholden to what the US says at the moment in terms of, say, we are being forced to reduce tech taxes because there's a threat of sanctions on us. So not being in the EU makes as I said the other day, the UK rather vulnerable. So that could be something that the US could hold over us. Anyway, the continent's policymakers could prohibit tankers found to have carried Russian oil from docking at its ports. A nuclear option would be to suggest that third country buyers of Russian oil and those who bank them, could lose access to its financial services and common market. Doing so would carry big costs and risk heavy blowback, not least from Mr. Trump, who might see European hard-headedness as undermining his deal. For Europe to consider such secondary actions, the peace deal proposed by America would have to be awful. And here's the problem. So, and I think it kind of hints this, but says, this could cause blowback. The point is, if the US lifted sanctions and Europe didn't, it would further exacerbate the issues between Europe and the US. Like, the Trump administration already hate Europe. If we go hard on sanctioning Russia still and the US want to lift those sanctions, then there will be massive tension and there could be an even greater economic war between the two entities. And Mr. Trump's foreign policy chiefs have yet to talk to the EU about what they plan to do with their sanctions. Quote, that's absolutely idiotic, fumes one confidant to European leaders. To Russia, Europe has always mattered more than America. In Mr. Trump's parlance, that means Europe has decent cards. Ignored and threatened, it may be tempted to use them. And of course, the point is, by using them, they're using them not just against Russia, but arguably against the United States as well. Tea break, much needed. Thank you. Okay, Yannick Jadot, a senator from the Greens party in France, is on trial this Tuesday for defamation. In the spring of 2022, at the beginning of the war in Ukraine, he claimed that TotalEnergies, which is going to be, I presume, Total, the French oil company, which continued its activities in Russia, was, quote, complicit in war crimes. I would have thought that would be an easy case to win, because I think you just have to... I mean, I'm no lawyer, but you look at the definition of complicit, and I'm pretty sure that even if you feel you're contracted and have to stay in Russia, if you are staying in Russia and you are funding the Russian funding the Russian treasury, then you are going to be complicit in war crimes, because that treasury is being used to carry out war crimes in Ukraine. I would think my position would be he's probably got a pretty good case against TotalEnergies. But anyway, there you go. 62% of foreign companies from unfriendly states exit Russia amid the war, media reports. In 3 years of full-scale war against Ukraine, 62% of companies from countries deemed unfriendly by Moscow have exited the Russian market, RBC reported on March the 25th, citing an audit by consulting firm Kept. I have a feeling that Belgium comes out the worst here. Belgium is the worst country, I'm sure, for this, as it was reported elsewhere. Let's have a look. Companies from Northern Europe had the highest exit rate, with 94% leaving Russia. Finland led with all 20 companies in the sample exiting, followed by Sweden, 13 out of 15, Norway and Iceland, both 100%. Denmark lagged slightly, with 74% of firms having exited. Exit rates among major Western economies varied significantly. The US, Germany, France, and the UK saw rates between 59 and 67%, while Canada, Australia, and New Zealand recorded a full 100% exit. In contrast, Austria had a rate of 50%, Switzerland 38%, and Italy only 22%. Where I'm sure I saw Belgium somewhere, but it's not mentioned here. Let's have a little look for Belgium not even mentioned in the article. But I saw elsewhere reported that that Belgium were the worst in Europe. But hey, I could be wrong. It could be a different analysis. But anyway, there is that. Now, we're going to move on to talk about the United States, and here's our segue. Trump has said a number of EU countries have been, quote, ripping off the United States for 45 years. While they were soft and weak because of the actions of some countries, the US had a $36 trillion national debt. Okay, it is very evident. In fact, I'm going to move this video to the fore here now, because I think it works on the back of this segue. Trump is really ramping up his rhetoric, and we've seen this from JD Vance, and then we saw it in the Signal scandal with the messaging from Hegseth and JD Vance that Europe are pathetic, freeloaders, this and that. It is becoming clearer and clearer that the US sees the EU and Europe as a whole as the enemy, more so than Russia. This does not portend well for the future of security in Europe and relations between the two entities. It is staggering how much of a different place we're in 8 weeks after the inauguration. Those 8 weeks have changed the world immeasurably. It's insane. And Trump seems hell-bent on attacking Europe at any conceivable opportunity, saying ridiculous things. Like, the full quote from this is actually fairly absurd, and I think we might have it later on. But it's like, it's incredible that he thinks, you know, we're sort of responsible for the $36 trillion national debt they've got, and that we were created in order to destroy the United States. The EU was created. I say we, the EU. I'm going to now, this is still going on. This is a live chat, but I'm going towards the beginning of it. It's literally still taking place, I think. Maybe not. Where Alistair Campbell, who sits on the left, spin doctor for Tony Blair, and Rory Stewart, a former Conservative member of Parliament in the cabinet, I think he was, and also ran for Mayor of London. So different places on the political spectrum, but actually I think both of them are fairly centrist these days, talking about the outcome or the ramifications, the impact of the Signal scandal. So we're going to go there first, and then how that's impacting the relationship between the US and the EU, or the US and Europe.
And the other thing that comes through, as you say, going right through the thread, is the fact that Trump has asked for this. So there is a bit of a discussion about, well, is it the right thing to do? Vance is a bit sort of skeptical. But the kind of basic feeling is, well, we've got to do it because he's asked us to. And then the other thing that comes through, particularly from Vance and Hegseth, is that this contempt for Europe is really, really deep. You know, I'm sick of bailing these people out, and yeah, I agree with you, they're freeloading yet again. And it's sort of a contempt, which we've also seen again this week in relation to Denmark. JD Vance talking about how Denmark's not a reliable ally, and his wife making this ridiculous trip to Greenland to watch a dog race. A plane yesterday arrived in Greenland with 100+ Secret Service guys to go and set up this visit from Mike Waltz, the security guy, and Mrs. Vance.
Fun fact, JD Vance is now going, and second fun fact, I think they've cancelled going to see the dog sled, and they're only going to the military base now. And I have a feeling, we're going to report this a little bit later in this video, but I have a feeling that I talked last night in a live stream, and I was arguing against Prof. Gerdis very much about Trump and what he says and why we should pay attention to what he says, because what he says has a tangible effect on people. So if he's talking about Greenland and Canada in these ways, it's, as some analysts have said, it's irrelevant whether it's true or not, or whether he believes it or not, because it has an effect on what people do and the relationship between these places. So now Canada is in an economic war with the US, so that is happening. But also the stuff he says about 51st state has now made Canadians hate the US or hate the Trump administration to the point of boycotting everything, buying themselves guns and all sorts, right? That is a real effect. So, don't listen to what he says, look at what he does. No, people are listening to what he says, and what he says affects places tangibly. And the same can be said about Denmark. But I also think he believes these crazy things he says, many of them. So some people say, it's just bombastic. But actually, like Gaza, that was based on what his son-in-law was saying, Jared Kushner, about waterfront properties in Gaza. You could turn Gaza into X, Y, and Z. So then Trump goes full on into this, we're turning it into the Middle Eastern Riviera. It's not that he was just saying that, throwing spaghetti at the wall and see if it stuck. I don't really believe it, I'm just going to say it anyway. I'm sure there are some things like that, but there are some big things he says that he genuinely believes. And I think with Canada, like, he doesn't really think it through too much, like how it works, and with Denmark and Greenland as well. But he genuinely believes it. We will get hold of Greenland somehow. And when he walks these things back, he's not walking them back because he never really believed them in the first place. He walks them back because people around him convince him that actually it's not going to work. So with Gaza, he didn't continue talking about that because actually countries came out like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, countries that would be absolutely necessary for that plan to work. And they came out and said, we're not supporting that plan. It won't work. And that's when Trump stops saying that stuff. But he believed it would work initially. Solving the Ukraine war in 24 hours was something he genuinely believed. He was that bombastic. Then he gets to the point where he's like, it's more complex than I thought. And he's literally saying that. And then 3 months later, he says, I was being sarcastic. You don't wait 3 months and then say that as an afterthought. So that's a post hoc rationalization. But the rationalization at the initial point of saying these things was that I actually believe myself and I think we can do this. So with Greenland, I think as well, some of the rhetoric is changing because actually he's being told by people around him, that's not going to happen. They're a NATO ally. Please stop saying this. And Denmark also pushing back, the EU pushing back. And then you've got JD Vance changing the plans there, going along, but only going to the military base. And Putin, Trump changing his rhetoric somewhat. So dialing back some of the Greenland rhetoric. Now, instead of saying it's going to happen, saying, I think it's going to happen. And she understands the concept of Greenland. Like, we're saying weird things, but also sort of dialing it back somewhat. But it's not because he didn't believe it in the first place. And that's a really important thing to remember, to understand.
I mean, this is absurd. And what we're seeing, I think, is that what this WhatsApp group, Signal group, has shown is a sort of a style. What we're seeing again is in their response is indicative as well. Donald Trump saying, I don't know anything about this. I think The Atlantic's a terrible magazine. Their ratings are hopeless. Their sales are falling. I think it's going to go out of business. And Hexeth coming out basically attacking the journalist, saying that this is a guy who's only ever done hoaxes about Trump. Nobody within the administration taking responsibility for the fact that this is a massive security breach.
I think it also lifts the lid, as you're pointing out, on what's happening now to the US and national security planning. So traditionally, what you would see is people sitting in the National Security Council around a table. And as you say, each one of them would be heavily briefed with their aides and assistants behind. They would all have a common information picture. So, this is the stuff that we did in the British National Security Council, but you'd put up a slide deck where everyone would agree on the basic facts. You'd have a view on what the impact of attacking the Houthis were going to be on the shipping lines, what impact you might have on oil prices, what impact you might have on your strategy for the whole region. How does it tie in, for example, to your Middle East strategy? What difference is it going to make in Gaza? What impact is it going to have on Egypt, etc.? And then everybody would talk in turn. And in the old-fashioned system that exists in the US and in the UK, each of those individual people will often talk on behalf of their own department. So that
this is why I love listening to Rory Stewart, because he comes at this like, I having been there. I used to be in meetings like this. This is how it went, certainly in the UK government, and I know that things were similar in the US government. So now to be having these discussions just as a kind of casual signal group chat is insane.
the defense secretary would probably talk about some of the technical considerations, how many cruise missiles we got, where our aircraft carriers are based, and what the likelihood is of hitting the targets properly. State would then come in and give you the broad strategic picture. How's it going to affect the region? So here's a good question for state. We told off the Saudis and UAE for attacking the Houthis. The US government said that the Houthis took them off the terror list and put huge pressure on Saudi and UAE not to attack the Houthis. And Trump didn't respond in the last administration when the Houthis attacked Saudi and UAE. But we're responding now because they seem to be threatening Israel. How are we going to explain that to our partners, right? And then finally, I guess, some communications people might come in talking about how this goes forward. Now, none of this is happening here. Firstly, no officials are in a room. There's no common information picture. And the conversation basically is focused on really only three issues. Issue number one, we don't like Europe, and we're worried that by doing this, we might be somehow bailing out Europe. And Stephen Miller then puts a lot of emphasis on, we better get the money back from Europe if we do this. Second thing is comms. How on earth are we going to explain this to the American people? None of them have heard of who the Houthis are. Doesn't this contradict other stuff that we're saying? Can we pin this on Joe Biden and Iran? And number three, President Trump has said something. We don't really know why he said something. We don't really have the confidence to go back to him and question what exactly the reason is that he wants to hit the Houthi. We thought he was an isolationist. He didn't like doing this stuff. He's doing this stuff. How does this make sense? But in the end, we're too afraid to do this because Stephen Miller's come in and said Trump's already greenlighted this. So we'll try to provide a justification after the event.
Well, that is just a very, very accurate description, it seems to me, of not just of this chat group war room, but also of how they operate. Following his whims, following no real sort of focus upon fact, no discussion. No, we don't know this wasn't necessarily the entirety of the discussion, but no sense of anybody from Congress being involved, no sense of anybody being brought in to be briefed on it, no sense of talking to allies, no sense of anything other than Trump has had a bit of a whim. How do we make that work for us? Bear in mind this.
And this is a really important point there, because I was going to say this, and actually Alistair Campbell hinted at it, which is you don't know that meeting that Alistair Campbell was talking about hasn't taken place, and this is on top of that. But actually, the conversation in that thread appears to be exactly the conversation you'd have in that meeting. So I think the thread, the chat room, and the fact that all these people all around the world, you've got Witkoff in the Kremlin, you've got J.D. Vance saying he was in Wisconsin, was it? Or Michigan, and you've got people. It's clear that meeting hadn't taken place in the way that was outlined there by Rory Stewart, and this is live, by the way. There's still a live chat going on. So I think this is absolutely outrageous. That the meeting here, the signal group is instead of what should be a proper debriefing and well, not a pre-briefing. And done in a proper way. It's just incredibly slapdash when they're just sort of talking about, okay, we're going to do this and this is how it's going to be, and everyone cool with that? Yep, we're cool. Okay, let's do it. And I've got the green light from the president. All this almost like hearsay to give permission for this stuff to happen. It's just incredible, absolutely incredible. And of course, it's on Signal, which we'll talk about in a second.
These are the people who, when Hillary Clinton was, using her own private email, which is on a, this is so much worse for all sorts of different reasons. But this led to the entire MAGA movement suggesting that she should go to jail. Pete Hegseth, the Fox News guy turned defense secretary, there were clips running all over social media last night of some of the stuff he used to say about, if something's top secret, it's 'cause it's top secret. You don't talk to anybody. Everybody knows the rules, apart from me now that I'm actually in charge. And I just can't get my head around the fact this is going to do so much damage unless there is actually some sort of accountability, And of course, there's going to be no accountability.
I mean, the only thing good that's come out of this is that the CIA director went in front of the Intelligence Committee, also talking about the signal issue, did say some somewhat positive things about Ukrainian bravery, I guess. CIA Director John Ratcliffe says Ukrainian people and the army have been underestimated. He warns that Ukrainian forces are prepared to fight with their bare hands to defend their sovereignty. So, you can't just negotiate over them. They are willing to do that. But the whole signal debacle, it's just ridiculous. And the way it was being dealt with, which is deny, obfuscate, and then actually say, rather than this being a bad thing, it shows how wonderful, as I said the other day, talked about in yesterday's video, how wonderful actually these people are. This is Senator Mark Warner, the vice chairman of the Intelligence Committee, going to town on Tulsi Gabbard and John Ratcliffe in this. This was a pre-organized intelligence hearing that also had Kash Patel in, that just happened to align with when the signal debacle erupted.
Yet suddenly, and for no reason that I can understand, the United States is starting to act like our adversaries are our friends. Voting in the UN with Russia, Belarus, and North Korea. That's a rogues gallery if I've ever heard of them. Treating our allies like adversaries, whether it's threats to take over Greenland or over the Panama Canal, destructive trade war with Canada, or literally threatening to kick Canada out of the Five Eyes. I feel our credibility is being enormously undermined with our allies, who I believe, and I think most of us on this committee, regardless of party, believes makes our country safer and stronger. But how can our allies ever trust us as the kind of partner we used to be when we, without consultation or notice, for example, stop sharing information to Ukraine in its war for survival against Russia? Or how can our allies not only not trust our government, but potentially not our businesses with such arbitrary political decisions? Let me give.
And I think he's absolutely on point now. I'm going to bring in something I was going to talk about later, but just an indication of how insane, foreign policy has become. I think this is quite an interesting reflection. Timothy Snyder says, I knew Dan Dresner, so this analyst, when his headings were, so on his Substack, headings were things like, sanctions work somewhat better than you think. Now Daniel Dresner's heading for his latest article on his Substack is, and he says, he introduces it, I guess I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. F decorum. So I'm fed up with decorum anymore. And he's just written this article. American foreign policy is being run by the dumbest MFers alive. Mother effers alive. Like, that's his title. Like, that's a frustration of these analysts. They're like, what is going on? So you got Mark Warner in this hearing rightfully saying, like, what is going on? Like, we're treating our allies as our adversaries. Like, we're treating Ukraine like this. We're treating Europe like that. What are we doing with Greenland and Denmark? What are we doing with Panama and Canada? And what are we doing with Russia? And yeah, no wonder people are saying our foreign policy is being run by the dumbest mother effers alive. Just incredible. But of course, I am going to play you this video again because I think it's worthy of note. As Andrew Perpetuous says, the way the Republican congressmen are sitting by as the very national sovereignty of the United States is under this degree of threat is disgusting. The Republican Party is a dark stain on the United States. So he's going pretty mad about it at the moment, focused around what's happening with Russia. So let's just remind ourselves of this video to then give us a taste of then how we understand everything that's taking place.
Zelensky shouldn't have allowed this war to happen.
He's no angel. He shouldn't have allowed this war to happen.
Zelensky had a desire to fight Russia.
Zelensky decided that I want to fight.
Zelensky is gambling with World War III.
You're gambling with World War III.
Zelensky's poll ratings are low.
His poll numbers aren't particularly great.
So, Ukraine has to have elections if it wants to sit at the negotiating table.
When they want a seat at the table, you could say the people have to, wouldn't the people of Ukraine have to say, like, You know, it's been a long time since we've had an election.
Zelensky is disrespectful because he is used to talking to the Biden idiot.
What you're doing is very disrespectful. That wasn't with me. That was with a guy named Biden, who is not a smart person.
There is great probability that Ukraine will become Russia.
They may be Russian someday.
Americans have adopted our point of view.
What has been said in this studio for a long time is now being said by the American administration.
It's such a pleasure to watch. We rejoice whenever this happens in the enemy camp.
So you get this understanding that everything that Trump is saying at the moment appears to be exactly what Putin would want him to say, and it's exactly what the propagandists have previously said, right? Just insane. And you see the investigative journalist Wendy Siegelman with a new piece. Russian-American businessman Anton Postolnikov loaned $8 million, which we already knew, to Trump media in 2021 to 2022. He also sent $10.8 million to a firm named 11 Ventures LLC. New reporting shows a firm with that name is linked to Eric and Donald Trump Jr.'s new business partners, and she's written an article on this that is, or a set of articles on this that you can go and read. Russian-American businessman who loaned $8 million to Trump media sent $10.8 million to a firm that may be linked to Trump Jr. and Eric Trump. Last year, The Guardian reported Russian-American businessman Anton Postolnikov, nephew of an ally of Russian President Putin, provided $8 million in loans to Trump's social media company in late 2021 and early 2022. It's something we forget. I knew this happened, but, you know, I forgot about it. Should have brought that up in the conversation with Zarina Zabriskie the other day. And then, you know, goes on to talk about all these connections. I'm not going to go through all of that in the moment, but there are all these connections of Trump to Russia, as we've talked about previously. And then, in fact, let's go back and just hear a bit more connection and talk about Europe as well.
There are heads that roll. There's no sense that is going to happen. It's just another day. It's another story. It's another big blah that we can all talk about for ages, and then we'll forget about it and people will move on. And Mike Johnson, the speaker, so there's Congress, which is being sort of emasculated before our very eyes. And Mike Johnson basically comes as, well, I've just been in the Oval Office with the president, and he then just gives the line to take. Somebody's made a mistake, they'll look into it, it won't happen again. The Russians are going to be laughing their heads off yet again at them. They've had such a good week. They've had Steve Witkoff, Trump's connection to Putin, did an interview which I think I hate to talk about Tucker Carlson because I think he's a sort of malign force. But the fact is, as an interview, I think communications and political communications students for generations to come will watch that interview between Steve Witkoff and Tucker Carlson as an example of how easy it is for Putin to manipulate Trump. It is the...
Okay, so the reason I'm going back to play this is because now we've just looked at that video again of Trump just regurgitating everything that Russian propagandists have said. And then when we've looked at maybe further connections between Trump and Russia, and then when we look at, you know, downplaying of Signal, and then the Steve Witkoff interview is such a massive insight into the thinking of those at the top of the American political hierarchy. And actually, I know we've been over this, but their analysis on this is really very good. So I'm going to let it play out.
The most remarkable thing where Steve Witkoff, an American whose qualification for this job as special envoy seems to be that he's played golf with Donald Trump quite a few times, essentially is feeding and having fed back to him Kremlin talking points in an interview with Tucker Carlson, which at times absolutely beggared belief.
I think it's an amazing echo of what we've seen from Signal. In this new world, we're getting insights into the heart of this administration in real time in a way that was almost never possible before. I mean, there's something about podcasts, partly, isn't it? Because we also benefit from this. The fact that Witkoff is prepared to sit down for an hour and a half, really sort of uncensored and untrained, just shooting the breeze with Tucker Carlson, suddenly reveals an incredible amount about the kind of anthropology, to be pompous, of the Trump administration. I watched it yesterday, and it's really interesting. It's interesting partly because sometimes he's quite surprising by being less extreme and less obviously nasty than one gets the impression the Trump administration is. So he comes across as quite an amiable elderly man who talks very politely, sounds very reasonable all the time. And you can absolutely see how the MAGA crowd listening to this are going to think, well, it sounds all right. I'm just saying I'm going to listen to all sides. There are some very interesting little glimpses into foreign policy thinking from Witkoff, which we haven't seen before. So really important on Ukraine. This interview reveals that they are considering, or at least Witkoff's considering, giving Article 5 guarantees to Ukraine without NATO membership. So full US security guarantees for Ukraine without NATO membership. Number two, he seems to be saying that he doesn't think that Hamas can be militarily defeated and they're going to have to continue because Hamas is an idea. Nevertheless, some disarmament can happen. And number three, he seems to be being very positive towards Ahmed al-Shara, the Syrian president who we interviewed, saying that he genuinely believes he's changed and can be a partner for peace in the region. So there's three huge revelations, which are very odd, and which may turn out, of course, because the way the Trump administration operates, to be completely undermined by Trump next week, who may well say, no security guarantees, Giuliani's not to be trusted, and we want to continue the war against Hamas. The other thing that, of course, goes through it, which you've told us about, again, is loyalty to Trump. I mean, in answer to almost every question, Witkoff keeps saying, of course, don't give me any credit. The real genius here is President Trump. Only President Trump would have been able to do this. This guy's so outcome focused, etc. And then, of course, we have this weirdness around Putin, where he talks about how Putin has painted a beautiful portrait of President Trump that he's carried back, that Putin's told him that he's prayed for President Trump's health, and that he keeps saying, and Tucker Carlson keeps echoing this, what a straightforward guy Putin is. He's a straight shooter. And Tucker Carlson says, yeah, every leader I've talked to around the world says, whatever you think of Putin, you can absolutely trust him to say it how it is. Yeah,
I found those bits pretty chilling because, again, I think there's a danger with this, like with the signal thing. Even already, when you're watching the news coverage of this, it's sort of, the White House has accepted that a mistake was made, blah, blah. It's an abnormal government being covered as normal. It is so abnormal to have somebody who's clearly not that qualified in this level of negotiation being the person to go to sit down to negotiate one-on-one on behalf of Trump with Vladimir Putin. It is not normal. And then what is really not normal is for that to be an American who is clearly utterly desperate to see this guy as a good guy. I actually felt sick watching him explain the thing about the painting, because he was basically saying to Tucker Carlson, who, as we know, is an unadulterated member of the Vladimir Putin fan club, and he was saying to him, but, Tucker, let me just explain how nice this guy is. One of the first things he did, he got this painting commissioned by one of Russia's greatest artists, and it's a beautiful painting. It's a beautiful painting. And I was
if you remember the other day, I was doing a whole piece on just taking the mickey out of that reaction that he had.
Able to take that back and show it to the president with a message from Vladimir Putin. That's how close these guys are. And then there was the other thing you didn't mention in the other thing that I thought was interesting. We're going to go on to talk about Turkey in a minute. He talked about there's some great news going to be coming out of Turkey. And I think we're going back to this thing about the strong men. He just loves to be seen on a par with these guys. So then and then the thing about the praying, I mean, the image, if you knew nothing about current affairs and you suddenly just relied for your analysis of Russia and Putin on this interview between Carlson and Witkoff, you get a sense of Putin as a family man, a nice guy, a God-fearing person who just wants to do the best for his country. And then also the level of ignorance when he said about, the thing is, the big issue here, Tucker, what we're talking about here, Tucker, it's these 4 or 5 provinces. There's Kyrgyzstan, and there's Crimea, and then Carlson comes in and says Lugansk, which of course is what the Russians call it, with a G, right? Yeah, Luhansk. So he can't even name these damn provinces. And then he says, and they had a referendum there and they speak Russian. This is like somebody saying that because a lot of Irish people speak English, Ireland is actually still part of the British Empire. So it was puke making. And yet this is the guy in charge. It's mind blowing.
Final one that links the signal revelations and the Witkoff interview is the contempt for Europe. So there's a very striking thing, which I think will be a theme for the next 4 years, which is when he says, Europe, unfortunately, is dying. Europe's dead. The future is the Middle East. The future is Israeli tech, Saudi, UAE investment in technology, young leaders, dynamic growing economies, people who want to do business. That's what Trump understands. Europe is dying. Very interesting, because there's two things that he doesn't mention there. Firstly, those economies in the Middle East are 1/10 the size of the European economies. He's got a completely out of whack vision of how important they are. And secondly, he doesn't remotely take into account the fact that Europe are liberal democracies. They're the United States' longest standing allies. They're part of NATO, whereas Saudi Arabia and UAE are autocratic monarchies. And all these countries are involved in very, very aggressive actions against human rights dissidents, against their neighbors. None of that features. So complete shift in region, complete shift in values.
This thing in Europe is interesting because the guy's not an experienced politician, and he was being led. He was a witness being led quite a lot of the time by Tucker Carlson. So, for example, the BBC headline out of the interview was actually Witkoff agreeing with a question from Carlson that Keir Starmer's position on boots on the ground,
this is important. I'll let you know why,
was a posture under pose. And he said, what's Starmer up to? Is this just like a posture and a pose? Yeah, Tucker, it's just a posture and a pose. And they feel they've got to be like Churchill. Now, no serious senior politician would have kind of fallen into that little sort of trap as easily as he did. But I think that does, again, indicate this sort of contempt for anything European. And there was then this awful bit where basically Carlson again was leading him and saying, why would he want Ukraine? Why would he want it? I mean, once he gets this bit back, he'd fine. And you see, why would he want anything? When they talk about, then he'd go for other European countries. Why would anybody want these countries? I wouldn't want these countries, says Tucker Carlson. And they're sitting there laughing about the whole thing. I just found it sickening but as you say, very, very revealing of a deeper thought. And I think we really are kidding ourselves if we hold on to this idea that America's still got Europe's back. But there's just too much from private and public, what they're saying. There's too much.
Absolutely. So, and that point about being led into questioning is actually really important. So Steve Witkoff being led a couple of times by leading questions means that he is not very strong and not very thoughtful in these kind of interactions, and therefore would be deeply, deeply unqualified to be negotiating with the KGB or with Russia over the future of Ukraine. Like, if you are putty in the hand of Tucker Carlson, if Tucker Carlson can lead you to particular conclusions by some simple leading questions, and you don't know how to rephrase that or deal with that or answer carefully, considering what it might look like to others if you say this thing or that thing, if you're just going along with the flow, you don't have that strength of opinion, and the desire to want to make sure that everything you say is justified and how it might sound to others and the opposition, then you are weak. You are not the right person to be negotiating with Russia. So actually, what Alistair Campbell said there, and I'd not picked up on this previously, is actually really, really important. And I think it's revealing of how weak Witkoff is as a negotiator for Ukraine. But going back to the whole signal thing, I mean, we've got talk. I won't relitigate it too much, but you got Tammy Duckworth. You've got Susan Rice, sorry, the former ambassador, saying that this is that Steve Witkoff was in a group chat and he had that. In fact, I will play this because I think it's absolutely super important in terms of Russian intelligence.
Donald Trump's special envoy to Russia, Steve Witkoff, was allegedly in Moscow while he was on this group chat. The CIA director, John Ratcliffe, testified today that he wasn't even aware today that Witkoff was in Moscow when I knew about it because it was a matter of public attention. How dangerous is that? Do you believe the Russians now have all of that information and potentially more? What can you give us based on what you know about these things?
Well, the Russians have whatever Witkoff was doing or saying on his personal cell phone. The way Witkoff should have handled this and the way this meeting should have been conducted is Witkoff should have gone into the U.S. Embassy in Moscow and gone into their secure compartment facility and conducted his participation by video conference. That's how this whole thing should have happened. There should never have been a signal chat used as the vehicle for a discussion that involved anything sensitive regarding national security. The Russians undoubtedly have it.
Donald Trump.
Okay, and why that's important? Let's piece that together with some other bits of information here, which is that per Politico's signal cannot be downloaded onto federal devices. So in other words, in order for Witkoff to be on that group chat and interacting, he had to have had that on a personal phone. And that personal phone would have been in, he's waiting for 8 to 9 hours at the Kremlin. So, quote, their personal phones are all hackable, a former White House official said, and it's highly likely that foreign intelligence services are sitting on their phones watching them type the shit out. Kiev diplomats warned about Signal, according to reports in defense industry news sites. US diplomats in Kiev have also been warned about using Signal. The reason it has gained interest in the administration is that it auto-deletes records under Project 2025. Deleting and not maintaining records, despite the law and the requirement to do so under the Presidential Records Act, is a deliberate part of undermining the Constitution and pushing the law to its limits. No evidence, no blame, no prosecution. It's a deliberate process to absolve anyone from wrongdoing and enable illegality. The analyst also then goes on to say, here are the laws being broken by using Signal or any other unauthorized act in government. Federal Records Act, the Presidential Record Act, the Espionage Act, the Executive Order 13526, CIPA, FISMA, and Sunshine or Open Government Laws. And you can see all the violations there on the screen. Failure to preserve government records, undocumented presidential level decisions, mishandling classified info, unauthorized communication of national defense info, insecure handling of classified materials, use of unapproved tech for secure information, and lack of transparency in governance. All of those have arguably been violated. And we have Tammy Duckworth, a veteran herself here and senator, saying the following.
The fact that every single one of those people works on that and was okay for multiple days with using this non-classified product to conduct their war plans shows a complete lack of professionalism and oversight by the people on there. And in fact, every one of those people should be fired. They should resign. Pete Hegseth is the most unqualified Secretary of Defense in history, and he is further demonstrating that by actually uploading classified war plans onto an unclassified network. And you're right, it puts our men and women in uniform in jeopardy, not just with this incident, but for the future. Because if I were our allies, I would think twice about sharing classified information with us.
Which is pretty hardcore. Now, it's absolutely hilarious that the investigation into this, so what happened? Well, Michael Walls added an unauthorized person to this group chat accidentally, and of course just had the group chat itself, started it. So you'd think, right, there needs to be a big investigation into this from the American government. Who is going to do this? Preferably from an independent, some independent entity. So let's see who is going to investigate Mike Walls. Let's have a look. I'll just check my documentation here. Oh, it's Mike Walls. That's it. Yeah. So instead of having an FBI investigation, as should have happened, Trump has appointed Mike Walls to investigate the matter, despite his clear interest in covering it up. I mean, what a joke. Absolutely a joke. And of course, Mike Walls is now saying that, hey, how did his number get onto my phone? It must have been hacked. And he's talking like, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but all the people out there, somehow this guy is the one that somehow gets on somebody's contact and then gets sucked into the group. And of course, then they start attacking Jeff Goldberg as if it's kind of his fault. Absolutely ridiculous. And then we hear that Trump's not planning on firing Waltz in the wake of that, but instead makes him the investigator. Waltz will be talking to his Russian counterpart about a Black Sea ceasefire deal and his plans to speak to Trump as usual later on Tuesday. Absolutely incredible. And how Fox News are reporting this? Well, actually, they're one decent intelligence reporter who I've seen quite a lot in the past, Jennifer Griffin. She's always pretty sound, actually, Jennifer Griffin. Michael Walls now saying, not surprised, she's professional, who knows what she's talking about, and we can't have that now, can we? So what's he talking about? Well, Fox News have benched her for 30 hours. They're not referred to her at all because she actually speaks the truth. And instead, they get people like Jesse Walters to talk absolute nonsense. This is how they're dealing with it, which is the Roy Cohn playbook. I talked about this yesterday. The lawyer Donald Trump was a protege of this lawyer, learned that you can never take responsibility, never say sorry, never say it was your fault. Deny, 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 attack, 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 famously, is what Roy Cohn said.
It's like Goldberg will sometimes send out fake names with a contact with their cells to deceive politicians. Wall says Elon and Big Balls are on the case. This wouldn't surprise me if Goldberg sneaked his way in. He's the lowest of the low. It's like Goldberg will...
I personally advise Goldberg, I'd just sue the ass off Jesse Walters, primarily because I hate him, but secondarily because that is just slanderous. It's absolutely slanderous. Yeah. And what does the White House say officially? Caroline Leavitt, the White House spokesperson. Jeffrey Goldberg is well known for his sensationalist spin. Here are the facts about the latest story. 1, no war plans were discussed. Well, actually, this is where I'm sure you're going to see these plans come out. The problem is he's keeping them back because of operational security reasons. So there will be discussions about, hang on, how can I defend my kind of honor, if you like, and my name, and hold these guys to account, because there clearly were war plans, and he's talked about the details that were on there in the abstract previously. 2, no classified material was sent to the thread. Well, already that's false by point of fact that it was agreed by John Ratcliffe that there were CIA agents or operatives on there whose names would have been classified. So literally just the people who were on there is classified material. And if it's not classified, then why aren't you sharing it with the public? So that's wrong. The White House counsel's office has provided guidance to a number of different platforms for President Trump's top officials to communicate as safely and efficiently as possible. As the National Security Council stated, the White House is looking into how Goldberg's number was inadvertently added to the thread. Just absolutely ridiculous. And as Ron Filikowski says, the White House apparently decided the best course of action was to lie their way through it. And then we have Leavitt here speaking to Jesse Walters.
Pete Hegseth, and the American people should be grateful to these individuals, and especially to President Trump, for putting together such a competent and highly qualified team who are killing terrorists that the Biden administration allowed to run wild in the Middle East. And that is the repeat.
So not only are we not going to take responsibility for this, not only are we going to deny that anything wrong was done, but we're going to say, actually, you guys should be thankful that these people are so competent. You guys should be grateful to these individuals. Don't go criticizing them. Actually, I want you to say thank you to them. Just absolutely incredible. And Mike Wilson.
Yeah, but how did the number? Have you ever had somebody's contact that shows their name, and then you have somebody else's number there?
Never make those mistakes.
Right? You got somebody else's number on someone else's contact. So of course I didn't see this loser in the group. It looked like someone else. Now whether he did it deliberately or it happened in some other technical mean is something we're trying to figure out.
And that's pathetic. Just to call him a loser here on national television, I think it's disgusting. I think Mike Walls is disgusting. I think they're all disgusting. And Laura Ingraham is just an enabler, and she's disgusting. It's incredible. Then we have John Ossoff here, who's a Georgian senator. Absolutely brilliant. I think hopefully he'll get through in 2026. He'll have a tough race. But he's acquitted himself really well here, speaking to John Ratcliffe, who says, was this a huge mistake? And Ratcliffe couldn't even admit it was a huge mistake.
Director Ratcliffe, this was a huge mistake, correct?
No.
So this wasn't, is it that it wasn't a mistake or it wasn't huge? Because it clearly was a mistake, right? To have this guy on there. And this is maybe why they're trying to get around it, say he put himself on there, that he blah, blah, blah. Hacked or whatever. Maybe that's a way of getting around it being a mistake. But it seems that most people are in agreement this was a mistake. And I don't think you can deny it. It's huge. It's been in the news as a massive thing for ever since it happened, right? So, yeah, how can you say no?
A national political... No, you hold on. No, Director Ratcliffe, I asked you a yes or no question, and now you hold on. A national political reporter was made privy to sensitive information about imminent military operations against a foreign terrorist organization.
Mistake of adding a reporter,
and that wasn't a huge mistake. That wasn't a huge mistake.
Well, I think they characterized it as
an embarrassment. This is utterly unprofessional. There's been no apology. There has been no recognition of the gravity of this error. And by the way, we will get the full transcript of this chain, and your testimony will be measured carefully against its content. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ouch, he's been reprimanded. Just crazy. I mean, I suppose the good news, US officials have privately assured European allies that President Trump supports NATO, that the US will not withdraw nuclear weapons from Europe and remains committed to the collective defense. That's coming from the New York Times. So that's something. So we're moving on now from the signal thing. Anton Gerashenko reporting on here. Well, first of all, Rick Grenell. So Rick Grenell is, I mean, he was I think a bad guy in the Trump 1.0. Less so now. Or even more so now, I should say. Rick Grenell here saying, let's be clear about the Budapest Memorandum. So the agreement to take the nukes off Ukraine, give them at the time to these were Soviet nukes, to give them away, get them sort of destroyed, and then give security guarantees to Ukraine. That's the agreement between the US, the UK, and the Russian Federation. He said, let's be clear about the Budapest Memorandum. The nukes were Russia's and were leftovers. Ukraine gave the nukes back to Russia. They weren't Ukraine's. This is an uncomfortable fact. People are going nuts over this. So if this is a level of knowledge of the American administration, then things are freaking bad. Like, if you don't understand that they were Soviet nuclear missiles, so they weren't given back to the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union had dissolved. So they were based in Ukraine. They were Ukraine's. Russian Federation was a different entity than the Soviet Union. This is a problem with the UN and their kind of blind assertion, if you like, that they inherit the USSR's seat in the Security Council and indeed the seat in the UN without the proper process being put in place. This is the same thing going on here with Rick Grenell, who says, well, these are Russia's nukes and they're just giving them back to Russia. No. So people have gone mental over this. Anton Gerashenko said, Rick Grenell, special presidential envoy for special missions of the United States, has a new interpretation of the Budapest Memorandum. Ukraine gave up our nuclear weapons in exchange for a commitment to protect us by Russia, United Kingdom, and the United States, not because they were Russia's. Of course, Ukraine's case could lead to other countries developing their own nuclear weapons or increasing their existing nuclear arsenal. In a world where a country can simply be invaded by a country that took the obligation to protect it, get away with it, nuclear weapons gain even greater significance here. This is a dangerous precedent and an even more dangerous path. Global security is at stake. But my goodness, there was a lot of reaction to Rick Grenell. Trump's envoy draws criticism after saying nuclear arms in Ukraine's were Russia's. US President Donald Trump's special envoy Grenell said that on March the 25th, that the arsenal stationed in Ukraine after the Soviet Union's collapse belonged to Russia. I can't believe that these people are so dumb, so ignorant, and in such important positions. It's a cacostocracy. The US is an absolute cacostocracy. The Trump administration is preparing to impose tariffs on 15 countries, including Russia. The US is preparing to impose tariffs, according to the Wall Street Journal, on March the 23rd. So I'd like to see if that's still the case, given the negotiations having taken place, including Russia. And then we have the whole Greenland thing. So we're going to finish off with this. I think Greenland is good. Well, let's listen to Trump speak.
One for you, Mr. President. Greenland is confused about the Second Lady and the National Security Advisor visiting this week. They're concerned that this is further provocation, whatever it is you ultimately want for Greenland. Could you further explain why they're going? What is the ultimate end goal when it comes to Greenland?
Yeah, well, not provocation. This is friendliness, not provocation. We're dealing with a lot of people from Greenland that would like to see something happen with respect to their being properly protected and properly taken care of. They're calling us, we're not calling them. And we were invited over there, and I thought it would be I have great respect for the wife of our of our great vice president. I think she's a brilliant woman. She's a very nice woman, and she loves the concept of Greenland, and so she's going.
First thing, well, a few things to note here. Like, it's not true what it's saying about Greenland. About, it's actually the US taking over Greenland is deeply unpopular, as according to all the polls, and them being economically coercive and rhetorically coercive to Denmark. I just, it's not about friendliness at all. Also, he doesn't know the name of JD Vance's wife, Usha Vance. He clearly doesn't know that, can't remember it. And then he talks about how she loves the concept of Greenland. So you can't, Greenland is a concept. It's this, I mean, technically, yes, all things are all abstract ideas are concepts of sorts, right? But, that's how he sees Greenland, not as this entity full of people and people with self-determination. He sees it as this idea that we can have. And I think that's just, his language is really revealing.
Going there, and I think Marco's going there, and some others are going there. But we've been invited, and they really like the idea because they have been somewhat abandoned, as you know. They haven't been taken good care of. And I think Greenland's going to be something that maybe is in our future.
So when I talked earlier, and I talked about this last night, I think he's tempering his rhetoric about Greenland. This is one of the greatest examples that now it's become just something. When he was previously asked, he says, yeah, we're going to get it. It's going to be ours type thing. And he was very assertive about that. Now his rhetoric has massively changed. Honestly, this is a big turn here.
Good care of. And I think Greenland's going to be something that maybe is in our future. I think it's important. It's
something that's maybe in our future. There's a great deal of modality there. I think the probability has now really, really been scaled back in Trump's rhetoric.
Important from the standpoint of international security. And if you look at the ships outside of Greenland, you have Russia, you have China, you have lots of different people and lots of different places, and it cannot go on the way it is. It's not going to go on the way it is. I'll make a statement. It's not going to happen. So they're going there, and that's purely friendship.
He speaks in such half-formulated thoughts, in real childishly naive sentences. Honestly, this man is how do I finish that sentence? This man is ... square brackets, insert reality. His language, I think, is incredibly reflective of him in general, of what he knows or what he doesn't know, and of half-formulated thoughts, of a great simplicity.
A lot of people, yeah. People from Greenland are asking us to go there. We have many, many requests from many, many people, some officials too.
Mr. President, one for you.
Goodness me. But then he's got his, cheerleaders in the form of people like Tommy Tuberville.
Oh, it's on the radar screen. President Trump is two things, Panama Canal and Greenland. Panama Canal is working out exactly the way he wanted it to. BlackRock bought both of the ports down there. The same thing with Greenland. It's all about national security, but it's as much about for the people of Greenland as anything. And if you just listen to them talk when they interview them on some of the interviews over the last month, they're all in on it. Now it's just we're going to have problems with the other group across the water. But I think President Trump's exactly right here. We don't keep going there for our health. I'll tell you, you don't go up there for your health. You go there to make something happen. President Trump's right on line with this. And again, he'll make it happen. He's a deal maker.
All right. Terrific stuff. Thank you so much, Seth.
So when you have I had this argument with Prof. Gerdes last night, which is don't listen to his rhetoric, just watch his actions. Well, when you got Tommy Tuberville, well, do we listen to his words? Like, everyone that's saying something's going to happen on Greenland, are they all lying? Do we just go, when Tommy Tuberville says, we're not flying up there for shits and giggles, and he's absolutely right. right? We're going to make it happen. It's going to be ours. And the people across the water might have something to say about this. Again, dismissive of Europe. Again, this is the enemy being Europe. He can't even mention Europe by name there. Really, really reflective, all of this discourse of a growing divergence between what should otherwise be incredibly close allies. Shashank Joshi saying, curious, does Denmark have to allow a Vance visit, or do Patufic arrangements allow unrestricted travel by US officials? So what's he talking about? Well, Patufic being a base up there. Latest is that Vice President JD Vance and co. are now have now cancelled visiting the dog sled race and Nuuk. That's a capital there, and only going to the isolated military Patufic space base, probably to avoid being exposed to Greenland protests. So this is what I thought would happen, is they arrive in Greenland and the optics would be terrible because people would be protesting the crap out of them. Absent previous words, that would have been a perfectly normal visit. Just incredible, absolutely incredible. And just to let you know that the US in general is just going in crazy directions. As this source says, people said I was being hyperbolic when I said that 2024 would be the last free and fair election in American democracy because Donald Trump won. The Doge administrator, so this is Elon Musk and his Doge flunkies, are checking every state's voter list and deciding who's a real voter. What could go wrong? And this is the White House saying, preserving and protecting the integrity of American elections. My goodness me. Well, this is getting, at least some people are standing up. This is a representative, Melanie Stansbury, just saying it how it is. And this is kind of where I want to leave it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think insanity is a good word for what's happening here on the House floor today. Another good word is bizarre. You know, when I go home and I tell my constituents what happens in these halls, they're amazed. And today is one of those days where I'm like, what the hell are these folks doing? Because while our economy is in crisis, while groceries and housing are at an all-time high, while our veterans and our firefighters and our teachers are being illegally fired, while Elon Musk is dismantling the U.S. Department of Education, and while the Secretary of Defense is trying to cover up the most incompetent national security leak I have ever heard of in my life, the Republicans in the House are trying to save the American people from the scourge of walk-in cooler and refrigeration efficiency standards. That's right. We are here wasting precious debate time on the U.S. House of Representatives floor debating, dismantling efficiency standards for walk-in refrigerators. How out of touch are you with the American people? Like, literally, I know you're not holding town halls and meeting with your constituents anymore, but you think that the American people voted for you to waste our time on refrigeration standards? That's what you think you were elected to do? Literally, how out of touch are you? Because no American voted. No American, I don't care where you are on the ideological spectrum, you did not vote for this. This is ridiculous, it's preposterous, and it's just stupid.
Wow. That's what I want to see more of. And just on this, on the notion of getting rid of lots of employees, I talked the other day about how Europe is looking to collect, sort of hoover up some of these scientists that are losing their job. Funding is going from all sorts of research as a result of what Doge has been doing with the NIH and other projects and funding of universities and all sorts of attacks that are taking place. Well, according to Reuters, China is trying to poach laid off US employees, including AI researchers. Beijing wants to collect intelligence from specialists laid off by the Trump administration. Some US officials with access to state secrets were not informed about how to act in the event of a request from foreign opponents. Oof. Dangerous times. Anyway, that's enough for me. It was a long one today, and I didn't even talk about all the peace negotiations stuff that we kind of discussed last night in the in the live stream, so there's still lots more to talk about. In the meantime, though, take care, guys, and I'll speak to you soon.